Hi! Thought you'd get rid of me, haven't you? RJ's Evolution Hour. We're ready for another hour of mayhem and science and beaten up on stupid creationists there. Yes, it's starting! Ta-da! Methodology of Creationism project. We'll toss off links to that as we go. And there's so much science out there and so little time to do it. I had mentioned to Cy the idea of covering a new thing that popped up as some creationists threw at me. There's a thing from Answers in Genesis, 3 Puzzles Evolution Can't Solve, by Kevin Anderson and Brian Catalucci, who turned out to be a new character on the block for me, and Dr. Nathaniel Jensen, that dated from 2015, that Answers in Genesis had put up. And I was intrigued because, boy, was it thin. Their first 3 arguments that atheists cannot answer. Life from non-life is a fundamental law of biology, and Kevin Anderson threw in that one. And it's, boy, the standard abiotics are impossible, and they don't really bother citing much in the way of any technical information on it. And then the information of life, Catalucci put that part in, where he goes on about the physical parts working in unison, and information comes from stuff. To discover that higher source of information for our entire universe, we must look to the Bible for the answer. In John 1:1, God's word states, in the beginning was the word, and so forth and so on, which is just the same argument that Philip Johnson offers over in Intelligent Design Land. And then finally, they get down to their third one that they can't answer, which is irreducible complexity, at which point they have to suddenly jump off and draw on the people over in the other camp, the intelligent design camp, which is Michael Behe's stuff, irreducibly complex cells, and these are rapidly too far complex for anything to work out. And if you bury it way down in the footnotes, you discover that Behe coined the term irreducible complexity to summarize the mutually interdependent systems that exist in the cellular level. Sadly, Walt Behe's critique of Darwin is devastating. Behe accepts evolutionary common ancestry and the secular timeline. And I'm going, hey, what? Yeah, he accepts the secular timeline part, but even though he kind of sort of says he's okay with common ancestry, I can't find any spot where he actually does that. And as for the devastating part, no, I'm sorry, I fact check him. I source check his data and have done that quite a bit in the hashtag tip posting. So sorry. And that's about the best they can do. It's basically a presumption that you can't explain where information and life came from, and you can't explain irreducible complexity stuff. And therefore, we don't have to think about anything else, like the reptile-mammal transition and dinosaurs and all that other stuff. Irreducible complexity was debunked. Yeah, heavy, but not according to the intelligent design gang. No, it's still as solid as all get out and absolutely perfect and incredible. How do they know that? Because the people at the Discovery Institute keep saying so. And so it must be so. I looked at it a lot in the Dynamania, or the Creationism Light chapter, number 4, at my website. And the difficulty is that Behe, in every single one of his irreducibly complex cases, when you looked at the fiddly bit details, you discovered that we didn't know all the fiddly bit details, and he would basically be jumping in, implying it's another branch of God of the Gaps argument. Theoretically, card they have to play. We reach the stage where we know so much about biochemical systems that we can absolutely say the way we can if somebody comes in with a perpetual motion machine and someone can say, "Put it on, but we bet you're making a trick somewhere because perpetual motion isn't possible. Thank you very much." And that's based on very, very rigorous physical laws. If we actually understood so much about biology that we could make those sorts of claims, that certain biological connective systems literally cannot form by slow stepwise processes, Behe's thing could mean something. When you look at the fiddly bits, it turns out that he hasn't really made his case very well, and he's got to jump off the ship on it. One of my favorite examples is the Krebs cycle, because some people were pointing out the Krebs cycle if you only look at little bits and pieces of it, kind of looks like it might be irreducibly complex, but in fact, we know how it evolved over time, and we have intermediate systems. And be he harumphed, well, I'm not claiming the Krebs cycle is irreducibly complex. Harumph, that's the point, Michael, because why the examples he gives, the flagella and the blood clotting sequence and so forth, seemingly irreducibly complex, because we don't know all the fiddly bit parts in the detail that we do the Krebs cycle. And as it turns out, we don't. You didn't know on the flagellum case, a lot of the subcomponent systems, cap that puts a cap on the flagellum and the motor proteins and so forth, although in the years since then, they've worked out more and more on the evolutionary origin of these systems. So bit by bit, step by step, is all of this going to end up on the Krebs cycle list? Is he going to give up? Because he's argued, he has claimed that if any of his systems can be accounted for by a purely natural Darwinian means, that's it for irreducible complexity. But I suspect he's not going to change. He's going to start rolling the goalposts, that as each one is worked out, he's going to add another one to the list and not bother about the previous one. So I doubt in practice that anybody in the irreducible complexity gang will ever really allow any of that to be done. Yeah, Miller has done an awful lot of work on that field because it's a lot of his area, but Doolittle on the blood clotting sequence, the immune system, a fellow with the fancy British name of Tom Cavalier Smith with a hyphen, who just lit in to, is just very little, not as well known as the stuff that happened with Ken Miller, who's gone after him there. Because basically, Cavalier Smith wrote a thing in Trends in Ecology and Evolution where he just, you're citing my work and you don't understand it, and here's all this work that I've done, and are you saying that my work really hasn't really meant anything? Couldn't you pay attention to a little bit of it? You don't know bullpucky. And it's revealing that although Behe knows about that review, responded to it, he's never commented on it. It's really hilarious. At the clotting things, heavy haul, yeah. I'm trying to remember all five of them. The flagellum is one of his irreducible complexity, and the blood clotting sequence, and the immune system, and cellular membrane, cellular transport's one of them, and I think there's a fifth one, and I can never remember what it is. And I went through all of the ones that when you looked in Behe's Darwin's Black Box in detail, every one of them had these little buried caveats where he acknowledges that we don't really know how that works, and we don't know that, and they haven't quite worked that out yet. Well, if they can't pieces, how would you expect evolutionists to have worked patients step by step by step by step by step level? And that's what he demands, by the way. Behe requires you to have every tiny little bit and piece in there absolutely perfectly laid out in terms of Darwinian branching. But he doesn't have to do that himself for his intelligent design side. Ask him to work out, well, what design event? What would this design event look like? He just says, oh, we don't have to do that. That's something we can worry about later on. So it's a huge double standard where all the heavy lifting has to be done by the evolutionists, and the intelligent designers can sit back in their chaise lounge popping the champagne corks premature. Oh, boy. Anyway, if you go to the hashtag tip site, I'll see if I can put that in there. And just, this is a shameless plug to get people to look at my damn book, just bookmarking the damn thing. We'll read some of it for a change. And you'll find there's in there, which include Dinomania and flood geology and creationism light on intelligent design, and Planet of the Apes, which is on human evolution, and Because the Bible Tells Me So, which is not lambasting the Bible truth. It's analyzing how the same people, when they have their bad method on anti-evolutionism, use the same bad method when they try to talk about religious apologetics. And so it's again another methodological thing. Oh, B.J. Price, Khan Academy. Yeah, I keep looking in terms of all the incoming information on stuff. And some of the areas are legitimately ongoing research. They're still working out the fiddly bit details on the flagellum. It's generally understood now that the core of the flagellum is a secretion, has been co-opted bacteria as the type 3 secretion system. And because it was apparently a matter of being copied into the bacteria rather than secretion system being copied in to make the flagellum, that the intelligent designers say, see, this disproves the idea that the flagellum could have had a precursor system. And I'm going, what? No, terribly sorry. And as it turns out, flagellum itself, ooh, RJ important, off the top of your head, can you think of a time when Danny Faulkner flat out told a lie as opposed to just an interpretation error? Ooh, wow. Gosh, Faulkner pops up kind of, let me see how much I got in his, I got my, so let me see how much I got in on him. He's a persnickety little fellow. Remember, I don't think most anti-evolutionists in the sense of saying things which they know to be true. They repeat crap. Young sun paradox, geocentric gobbledygook. He's criticizing geocentrists. That's hilarious. In fact, he's got quite a few ones on that. Blue stars, cosmologies, gospel in the stars, cosmology, cellular nucleosynthesis, cosmic background radiation. So he's a cosmology guy. And I haven't done a full court press source analysis thing on the cosmological issues yet. In fact, at the moment, they've got more citations than I do on that. So I got to beg off on that little puppy to where I don't directly know examples of where Danny Faulkner define a flat-out lie. He cites a source which contains information which he has directly not discussed, which actually contradicts the point he has to make. And I imagine he'll probably be tripping up close to that in terms of synthesis and also star formation. But I cannot at the moment say anything offhand in the same way that I can with John Woodmarapp or Jonathan Wells or Michael Denton, where I know exactly where they're screwed up. So sorry I have to not make your day, Pologia. I want to keep going on that research. Is why everybody's got to support me at Patreon and GoFundMe so that I don't starve to death and I can actually print things occasionally. A big pile of printer paper, and I didn't have the heart to tell her that at the moment I don't have much ink to be able to actually use it to print with, but boy, I got a good 5 reams of paper to work with. Steve, you're a rock guy. Most of this is foreign to me. Yeah, geology issues just don't come up design reasoning because they just don't want to address those points. They don't want to criticize young earth creationism, and chronology doesn't, they don't bother about it. They know, Steve Meyer knows the earth's half a billion years, the Cambrian's half a billion years ago. He doesn't care in the sense that it doesn't affect any of their arguments. They live in a never world of there was a design event some point at a particular moment in time, even though technically there would have had to have been moments of time. But I can't ignore the young earth creationist side of things, in part because it's the same methodology. They just apply it to different things. The flat earthers have. I know Jeranism makes you want to, spit nails, but over-reliance on secondary sources, the repeating the same tropes, the never thinking through what they think happened, not worrying about what they would do to change their mind. That's the kit that can do that. The rest is just content obsessed with. High art, yeah, and Heavy Hauler will be back on a bit. The geology era is fun. It picks up on the matters of biogeography and animal distribution. And that's an Achilles heel for all anti-evolutionists, not just young earth creationists. Casey Luskin, when he was running amok, Institute, was their kind of point man on biogeography, where basically he said, no, this doesn't prove evolution to me, and I'm going to parse a bunch of stuff to think so. My favorite one had to do with travels. There was one of his posts that he stuck up where he was lambasting the idea that early primates might have rafted in vegetation mats, which ironically enough, young earth creationists insist on. They've got monstrous things with huge piles that are the size of states floating around in the post-flood era. So they kind of take this on steroids, but that never comes up in intelligent design. Picture where they're little court artists. He does a lot of illustrations for intelligent design stuff. Had a picture that was parodying Titanic, where you have these two chimpanzees standing at the front end of the Titanic, and their arms are out, and they're supposedly rafting across America, to America. Well, gosh, it's a bit more complicated than that, because first of all, they're not chimpanzee size. The primates that we're talking about, you can hold in your hand. All the early primates are little itty bitty rodent size. It's not until much later on that they start diversifying into larger ones. And the other issue is, don't you have to kind of figure out when and where and what the geology was? The Atlantic Ocean 50 million years ago was not quite as wide as it is now. It's almost. But the other fun part was, are there any island chains in between? Literally didn't occur to Casey. There might have been islands ocean if there was a Africa to South America route. There are other routes. You could actually go over the pole, which was another matter, that the primates would actually be going in the warm climate across what was in effect the future Bering Land Bridge, and sea level changes went up and down and so forth and so on. So the need for them to get across the Atlantic directly isn't necessarily true. But even in the across the Atlantic route, I found not one but two island chains that existed back in the Eocene that have since eroded away. And you've got we don't know what all lived on them because they were all eroded away, but they know from the geology amounts had expanded. So how much of this were island hopping examples, we don't yet know. But what got me was the fact that Luskin never thought to even look. He just jumped his conclusion. I've heard the shelf is breaking now. Oh, the ice things, that's another matter. Yes, and it is not just young Earth creationism, but anti-evolutionism in general. The mindset of theirs, that culture camp conservatism aspect, they're going to be climate change skeptics. Without exception. I can't think offhand, in fact, of any major anti-evolutionist who is not also a climate change skeptic. It's not that all climate change skeptics are anti-evolutionist. In fact, Ian Plimer, who's an anti-creationist geologist down in Australia, is a flaming climate change denier. And I would contend that's why he's so incompetent at criticizing young Earth creationists. This guy has got some methods problems. And Glenn Morton, the ex-young Earth creationist, is a climate change skeptic. Again, causing me to put little caveats of I'm reluctant to cite anything from Morton precisely because he can deck stack on the climate change issue. We'll see with all the climate material. Antarctica has had its warm phases and stuff before. One area that might actually do kind of well out of climate change will be Greenland, which will get to be green again under climate thing. But too much of the Greenland ice shelf melts, and that's what could sink New York. Oh, boy. So anybody got some other little questions in there on that? RIP New Zealand, RIP New Zealand shipping. Remember, we all know from Jaron that the world is flat. So they can always go across the other route that way using their compass. And then, of course, if they have to predict eclipses along the way, they're screwed. I'll give a little brief summary. I was in, and some of you were with me over there, the post-debate discussion of Nathan's debate, or Nolan, started with an M, debate with Kent Hovind. And I think the general consensus was heart in your right place, but you weren't up enough. And also Kent Hovind's gig to be able to keep up with him. And so he didn't acquit himself well. I hope he learns more, because there were some good points he made at times, but he was often slow to get around to them and let run roughshod, running amok over stuff where he would be throwing in assumptions and fields. And when you're trying to discuss a subject that was ideally talk about the flood, and you aren't prepared to discuss the Grand Canyon, which is constantly used by young Earth creationists, then boy, you're not up on the game. Else, where will they put the wall around the edge of the world? That's a really good question, you know. And boy, there's supposedly a lot of ice on that. It's really funny. Think about how I've seen the evolution of these circumstances, of how my sense of the geography of the world has changed, and how basically stuck. Because for me, I can't think of Antarctica without also thinking of Australia that used to be parked down next to it and how it's moved away. Antarctica, which through most of its history has been non-glacial. Now it's been parked pretty much at the pole. I think it kind of cycles around it. So it's an interesting geological reason, frankly, as to why Antarctic elements that are composed of several different have been pretty boring and stuck down at the southern pole for so long. Most of the other pieces of real estate have moved around. And the movement of Australia in particular is really interesting because it helped trigger off our main ice age cycle. Normally, to Antarctica, in order for water to circulate around it in a circumpolar current, it would go all the way up into the equator and warm up. So it basically warmed the climate up way more than what we're used to. That's why you could have nice fruity wines growing naturally in England back during the Eocene. Much warmer. And of course, the climate skeptics go, see, you don't need carbon dioxide from cars to make for warm climates. It's all natural. And if you want to push Antarctica and Australia back together again, then maybe you can get to that climate situation. It has to do with the geology. But once Antarctica separated enough from Australia moving northward so that suddenly the water switched into a circumpolar current that could go all the way around Antarctica without really going anywhere else, chilled things down in a hurry. And then the other factor that was occurring around the same period was the Isthmus of Panama was forming. And that cut off the circulation between the Atlantic and the Pacific. And that too forced the deep freeze. Plus, the Arctic was already ready to be primed to go polar. All it needed was to cut down on the water circulating because there's basically only one way in, narrow slot between Asia and America on the one side, and then the relatively narrow route past Greenland and that on the other. So it's a relatively landlocked. And most of the other times when we've had supercontinents, you haven't had a situation where the northern hemisphere, a landlocked set of plowing along in there. In fact, Pangaea, of course, which ran north to south pretty much. Rodinia before that was basically an east-west in the southern hemisphere largely, all centered around the southern pole. So you had supercontinent cases, you had huge super oceans that occupied most of the rest of the planet, but it differed because that was more northern hemisphere, whereas the one in the Pangaea case was both hemispheres, north and south. So those things have to be taken into account. Paleoclimate was doing in a year. Yes, oh boy, creationists don't think this one through very closely because they really got to account for why the state looks the way it does. And yeah, you can just in a magic thing like some 10,000 BC or 2012 science fiction movie have the continents move in lickety-split. On the geology, the rock formations, the scrapings of things, the geometric magnetic circumstances where you can see where they are, and the paleoclimate as it moves around, as you get different kind of animals on it because the latitude is changing, and that doesn't happen all at once, but it would having stuff happening super duper fast, and not Snelling or anybody else has ever gone into that. Oh, someday I want to see some creationists attempt to trace all 5 million land species back to their ancestors on Noah's Ark. Don't hold your breath on that one, AJ. Figure out how many kinds there were, because they're never going to deal with all the species except to try to whittle them down. I think they argue they're like 180 bird kinds, but to do that, lump like mad. So all of the finches, for example, all 1,200 species are supposedly one finch kind. So they can have a pair of little finchies aboard the ark, and then in lickety-split time, species are generated in a way that is just gobsmackingly impossible from a genetic point of view. It's really funny Grassroots anti-evolutionists are so insistent speciation doesn't happen, which they tend to confuse with kind, that is exactly what creationists are mandating happen for virtually everything. I would have loved the guy to ask Kent Hovind. I put in a question on it, but they didn't get around to it. To ask him when Kent was insisting that all the kinds are still around, because the whole purpose of the ark was to preserve all the animals. He briefly mentioned trilobites and then quickly changed the subject because it probably dawned on him that there ain't nowhere you're going to find a living trilobite. But I brought up synapsids. Tall mammal transition. Ooh, was there a whale hippo kind, an elephant hyrax kind? Ah, yeah, there we go. The artiodactyls, that's the group where whales are coming around. And they can still, one of the reasons why the whales are probably able to develop some of the breathing techniques that they do has to do with the way their artiodactyl cousins breathe. Nose breathing rather than mouth breathing. Remember Jimmy, the ability to talk while he's still breathing? That's a trick that the artiodactyls do pretty well. Ooh, species of spider are there? I don't know offhand. I can remember there are about 1 million species of beetles, but I actually am not. I seem to think there's tens of thousands, but that's just a number that I'm just kind of riffing off of. I know there's an awful lot. Vertebrates are relatively boring. We've got like 9,000 species of birds. We got about 1,000 species of bats, stuff like that. But Dr. Steve Austin's catastrophic plate tectonics model, one of the most laughable concepts ever. Yeah, that's up Austin. Austin is a funky little guy. He's got a geology degree, I think from a real live college. If you read his technical papers, which he publishes now and then, usually with a co-author, he's way lower level than Andrew Snelling. Snelling does get sciencey more in his materials. Snelling still publishes in regular science journals, which Austin really hasn't done in a long time. But I do know that one paper, a short paper he did with a guy named Hutch, when I tried to track down the source, I discovered it was one of those interesting examples of where the source didn't exist at all. It was a completely imaginary one, and I don't know how they made it up. Author who's still around, and he hadn't a clue what the hell they were talking about. So that's an indication that, shall we say, Mr. Austin is not the most reliable source guy. 35,000 spider species. Well, thank you, Stephen. I wasn't too bad on my memory. Thank you. Yeah, I thought it was in the tens of thousands. The chelicerates used as pro-evolution thing. The chelicerates are found in the Cambrian. Oh boy, but ones where they still have the chelicerae yet, those haven't evolved, and so they're evolutionary ancestors. There are no spiders and scorpions and horseshoe crabs in the Cambrian. That's millions of years later, and aquatic to begin with, and eventually they turn into the ones that were usually formed in the terrestrial environment. So basically, apart from the horseshoe crabs, all the marine chelicerates have basically gone by the wayside. They're probably outcompeted by other critters that have come along that regard them as an easy dinner. So all of the ones that we're famous with that got the venoms and all the other kinds of things, that's been all terrestrial adaptation. And of course, silk spinning and a lot of other stuff there, of which they've been at it for millions and millions of years, and are just now starting to reach where they got the tools available to ferret out more about the biological things that generate all that stuff. Yeah, in the B.J. Price, quite right. In the space of 4,000 years, that's a lot of speciation that nobody noticed. All of those finches have got to be done doing their speciation trick before they're discovered. So all the stuff on the Galapagos and all of the grass quits over in South America that are believed to be the ancestral group from which the finches from the Galapagos derived, all that had to be out of the way done before the Europeans and other people start paying attention to him. So you have a really relatively narrow window. That's got to be frisky speciation. Oh boy, God is quick. Well, yeah, and the irony is, why don't they just say cuz? Why don't they just say God does a miracle? He teleports things. But that sounds too ad hoc even for them, which is why they If it's the equivalent of creation with apparent age, they'll do it. The premature omniscience, yes, David 3:13. Yeah, come to earth, sacrifice himself. Yeah, that's the whole Calvinist problem to get into. Oh, do you know anything about the Bucking the Big Bang alleged protest petition signed by hundreds of scientists? No, I actually don't know about that. A weird group of anti-Big Bangers I do know about. I don't know about this particular petition. All young Earth creationists scream bloody murder about the Big Bang, so they're against it in principle. But you do have non-young Earth creationists who don't like the Big Bang. You've got still a tiny handful of Fred Hoyle steady state groupies, and you got a small number of people in the design movement who are anti-Big Bangers. I'm trying to think whether it's David Berlinski. It's either him or the other guy whose name suddenly escapes me. One of them is opposed to Einstein relativity theory, and the other one has got a problem with the Big Bang, and with just the same precision of logic that they have applied to evolution. But yeah, if you've got a thing on an actual petition about it, there may be. I know. I'm trying to think of the guy's name right off the bat, and I plead guilty for it suddenly having a brain fart, but he's one of the few remaining conventional physicists who's not a Big Banger, and he's not quite a steady stater either. He's just, I don't like the Big Bang, and they do have the problem because the data sensitive and all of that cosmic background radiation stuff has piled up to where to step over that. Oh. Background here, yes. Any other questions knocking in on there? So sorry I wasn't able to answer. That's almost a stump RJ on the Big Bang, and almost a stump RJ previous question there. On Faulkner is that I do not know everything, believe it or not. My as I keep on doing the work in my super duper spreadsheet that is not on the TIP website. That theoretically is my ace in the hole because that's the meta-analysis. And as I work through things where I'm tracking down all the primary sources and plugging them into the system and then counting them up so I know what everybody does, plus doing responses to them, cosmology areas and stellar formation were the least area that I had researched. Most of the research that I did for TIP over the years had to do with biology and paleontology. So I was way behind on that. At the moment, I'm just now catching up to where my list of the sources is about as big as the listing that the young Earth creationists have drawn on. And I hope over the next bit, like they've just found visual confirmation for the Oort cloud. They've just found examples of stars lighting up and planetary formations going on the fly in stuff from the new Hubble and the other one that I can't think quite the name of. And that means that it's possible with the current incoming science literature. You lie, you know everything except sports, admit it. Well, almost everything. But no, there actually are an awful lot of areas. Cosmology physics area is one I will be most careful on because it's the least familiar with, and it's very mathematic oriented. And so I got to tread very, very warily in there. And the same thing with radiometric dating issues. It's one where it gets really complex, and I've got to get a good feel of the thing. I'm a little bit farther ahead on that one than I am on the cosmology issue. And fortunately, the science keeps advancing. So I remember most of my life that any other solar system existed other than ours. The last 15 years, it's gone to, wow, you got stars up the yin yang, including the have planetary systems known from Alpha Centauri, door neighbor. RJ, are you familiar with the protozoan that lives in some termites, Mixotricha paradoxa? Ooh, let me check my bibliography to see on that. Let's see, and it comes up two results. The fine, let's see, there's a Wenzel, or Cleveland and Grimstone, 1964. It's a flagellate and its associated microorganisms. And then more to the point, Al 2003 on identification of the ectosymbiotic bacteria of Myxotricha paradoxa involved in movement symbiosis. So the answer is, and it's one of those that I would be getting around to, all complicated things that happen in organisms. Every organ is kind of a habitat. It's a little mini world, and there's all sorts of stuff living on it and other stuff that it gets eaten by and all that. So yeah, I thought you were going to stump me on that one. There may be other technical papers in the bibliography that relate to that don't have that in their key name. I'll have to plead extenuating circumstances that I don't know much on that. Probably the one I've studied the most and that comes most readily to mind is Wolbachia, which is the one that allows your mouse not to fear cats, a bug, and that allows it to be eaten by cats easily, which is the main host for the Wolbachia organism, and it goes into brains of things and changes their behavior and makes them all kinds of stuff. Anyway, there's some argument that since there's so many Wolbachia in our up in the brain, that some of the really dumb shit, jackass style, stupid, might be due to Wolbachia affecting our behavior. There is an ongoing set of research on that. You stand in awe, or if you're tired, you can sit in awe. Yeah, the star igniting up there. Finally had the last piece of the puzzle. We've got basically stuff where you can see solar systems stage of development. And remember, because we've been only looking for a short while, this is like trying to figure out the span of a gnat, how hard it's going to be to watch a glacier move or watch a cake bake. Because if something lasts longer than your lifetime, it's hard to do. Young Earth creationists are really hard at this chronology thing. My cats are afraid of mice. They have no predatory instinct. They suck. Yeah, well, the natural things vary. Ways animals adapt or not, especially in a human environment where we've altered the selection pressure on them. Anybody can take a question about a worms and segging the shit out of it is admirable. Oh, yeah, organelles. Literature there is another one that I pay really close attention to. The obvious cases, of course, are mitochondria and cyanobacteria, but there's actually examples, and I've cited the technical paper every once in a while, on tertiary and secondary endosymbiosis in the making, on the fly. And so there are new examples in living organisms of things where you're starting to see the breakdown of the individuality of the symbiont in exactly the way that needs to happen in these much older ones. And we know how persistent mitochondria are. Endosymbionts, boy, have they held on to their little turf, to where they still to this day have their own proprietary DNA, which they trade back and forth little bits, contain that independent of our nuclear DNA. And they got their little mitts on our apoptosis, cell death process, and a whole bunch of things. So mitochondria are persistent little bastards. Now we're 5:40. I am kind of keeping an eye on the mind there and trying to plug away on as many things as possible. Anybody got another cute little stump the RJ thing? That's delightful. And I don't even know whether I need to keep my volume on or not, but I don't. Mitochondria rock. Yeah, the fun thing about mitochondria is they're not entirely sure symbiont is the ancestor of it, although there's two different bacterial forms that are the heavy contenders. And it's because both of them are so relatively similar that either one of them could be. But of course, the obvious thing is these things are happening back early in the roots of multicellularity. So they're back like a couple billion years ago. And in fact, before this, the cyanobacteria entered the scene as plant chloroplasts. And deep and early on. And we can't assume forms of bacteria and lineages that have since disappeared completely, except for the little fossil form that we see represented by the mitochondria. If we could get in that old Wayback Machine, we could answer a lot of these questions, but in research in that area has to be done as a really long distance genomics, where you're looking at existing forms and then retro-engineering and retro-observing back billions of years. It's not an easy thing to do. Darwin's greatest hits. Yes, just looking at some of the little comments on there. Any idea how the parasites like the mouse one ever could have got started? Oh, well, same thing for the ones with ants and things. If you look at how these weird parasitical relationships work, to cross a hurdle. One of the reasons why a lot of organisms reproduce sexually is because that is a way to change your genome faster than your parasites. Likely the case with a lot of these weird parasites that have come in is they had, by the luck of the draw, either just the right combination and stuff and get a latch in before the sexual reproduction could compensate, or alter behavior in a way that it doesn't matter what happens. An analog of that is the AIDS virus, which isn't a conventional parasite, but the fact that it attacks the immune system means that it's invading the very area that is designed as the defense. And since it shuts it down, whoop, for all. I'll keep an eye out. In fact, that's an interesting question, is the idea of incipient parasitical systems of that type, and to see how many of them are just in the rudimentary stages as opposed to ones. Our new governor, astronaut and rocket scientist who speaks 5 languages. Great, yeah. Not Trump approved, BJ, yeah. Almost anything that Trump would approve is probably not a good idea. And anything that's really likely to be a good idea has a high hurdle to go over the narcissist in chief. So I'm not in a particularly happy mood about Trumplandia at the moment. I hate to be entering into the world of politics, but people who are as colossally ignorant as he is, I can't pretend they aren't or feel calm about it. They've already been trying to gut so many different science programs, including the earthquake warming system in California along the West Coast, where they have like earthquake problems, which is like virtually everywhere. You're lucky stars. You live in a pro-science world like Trumplandia, where they're going to seg you down the river. Now, if we only had Trump proper earthquake fault, maybe he might have paid more attention to that. I'm not sure about that. Net neutrality, that is another issue. The gang at the conservative sites have been latching onto. So you've got a whole bunch. Ooh, talk about weird parasites. Check out Saculina. That's the one that zombifies the crabs. Yeah, Stephen Jay Gould mentioned that. It's one that basically castrates the crab and turns it into a feeding machine to make more Saculina. And that's one that is so creepy that it really makes you wonder. Weird video called The Tingular. Yeah. The Tingler. You may or may not remember the old movie, The Tingler, with Vincent Price. That was one of those chintzy, cheap, and silly. Gosh, I suddenly forgot the name of the guy. He was trying to an Alfred Hitchcock light. William Castle in the 1950s and 60s, and it's an amiable movie. Not necessarily the most memorable, but heck, it's got Vincent Price. Symbiosis relationships are really quite fascinating. The term is used loosely, where like lichens are fungi that are in a symbiotic relationship with bacteria, and the argument is that maybe the fungi are getting more out of the deal than the bacteria are. But the full endosymbiosis stuff is literally where an organism has come about because of a formerly free-living organism that has become so merged with it that it can't exist independently anymore. Further than that, in cyanobacteria and mitochondria. Okay, Precambrian rocks. Oh, there was a thing that zapped by. Let me go over to the other one. Precambrian rocks don't have many fossils. We have to rely heavily on structural geology and geochemistry. Yeah, although part of that is what I call the Bermuda Triangle defense issue. when we're looking at Precambrian things, the rise of stuff with fossilizable hard parts for the most part. Unless you get one of these fancy Lagerstätten deposits that are able to preserve soft parts, you're invisible. We know there are huge ecosystems that are going on from the time, at least of the Ediacara biota, which is about 60 to 70 million years before the big Cambrian explosion, down through the tail end of the super duper snowball Earth, when practically the whole planet froze over. And therefore, almost everything that was alive had, by definition, to be under an ice cap. So they had to have a totally different way of handling things. Some are chemosynthetic, and others are making use of what they can get in the thinner areas of the ice through photosynthesis. But anyway, we do know that as you get closer and closer to the Cambrian boundary, you start seeing more and more trace fossils of things that are wiggling along and disturbing the soil and making little scratch marks, so that some of them have got some appendages. What they are, we don't have a clue, because there are no Lagerstätten. We know that though the forms of life that are thought on evolutionary, yeah, a lot of Ediacaran fossils, but they're virtually none of them. This is what we find with the big Cambrian Lagerstätten, your Burgess Shale stuff. And the paleontologists recognize this. They've got stuff that's enigmatic because they don't have any fossil to look close enough to see the inner parts. They've got very, very fragmentary bits. The biggest one, just to give you a sense of scale, a Dickinsonia, which looks about the size of your floor mat in front of your sink, about 3 feet across or so, is this weird little corrugated thing that varies in size and apparently moves. A few of the Cambrian organisms, Ediacara biota, move. Almost the rest of them are all sessile. The question is, were they the only critters in town during that period? And we don't know, because we don't have Lagerstätten. From an evolutionary point of view, the precursors to the arthropods and the chordates are probably knocking around during that period. That's what's making these little scratchy marks as you're getting closer and closer. They're not all just worms and annelids. And the prototrilobites and other kinds of things knocking around for quite a while. They'd all be extremely small. Hey, Lagerstätten are store spot with RJ. Yeah. I love you. Oh, you put in the umlaut. Yay. Yeah, Lagerstätten is the plural. Lagerstätte is the singular. And it's a term that pops up all the time. They're really rare. That's why they got a special name. And what's fascinating about the Cambrian, three of the bloody things. And they're all equatorial deposits, although the deposits now have been moved around because of plate tectonics. The Burgess Shale is the youngest of them. That's up in Canada. And Sirius Passet in Greenland, which is a relatively smaller one. And the Shengjiang deposit in China, which is the oldest of the one, I think. Either that or, yeah, I think Sirius Passet's in the middle, but my memory may be screwing up on that. But when they were all active, living, they were down along the equator, coast of what was then the breaking up Rhodinian supercontinent. We know there were other fossils knocking around. In fact, there's little snippets of Cambrian up Washington State, but they're trilobites and stuff. Now, another little critter that's a bear of importance is Claudina. It's a little teeny thing that looks like a little a dessert tube that you would stuff with marzipan or something. Not very big. I think they're only like about an inch-ish or so long. And they're from the Precambrian, they're from the Ediacar period, and they go all the way down into the very earliest Cambrian before they finally go extinct. And something we find all through that period, occasional traces of where there's boreholes in them. Something in to eat. That's why you have a shell casing to begin with. It's not because you just like that sort of thing. It means that you avoid being dinner that way. And so the existence of shells on stuff is telling us about predation. And the existence of predator-prey relationships not only throws the Bible into a cocked hat if you're a young Earth creationist, but it also whole ecosystem that's missing from our scope because there are no Lagerstätten to preserve what was going on. Lived inside the little Claudina shells. Why? No Lagerstätten. We don't know what it is that had a little radula or little toothy things or whatever capable of boring a hole into it. Lagerstätten. Later on, as we move into the early Cambrian, the Manichaean phase. Claudina survives into that zone for a while, and then there is almost nothing on the scope. Why? Because there's no Lagerstätten deposits. Then when we get the next phase, there's a turnover. This is millions. We're still 10 million years away from the big Cambrian explosion part. And you've got these small shelly fauna that are looking like little itty bitty ice cream cones. They're little tiny little things, almost the size, about the size of a ballpoint pen cap. And you can see some if you go up to the Museum up there at Drumheller up in Canada, one of the great museums in the world up there in outside of Edmonton, that you can see some examples of those. Shelly fauna become the dominant thing. There's lots of them. They're all over the place. They're found in Russia and a whole bunch of places. Well, why do you have shells? There's ecosystem going on where you got to have a shell to keep from being munched on. We don't know. What exactly lives inside the little shells? Because they're no Lagerstätten. But the scrapes and details that you can see, and you know how hard it is to look at a shell that's not much bigger than the tip of a ballpoint pen? This is hard work. It looks like these are very primitive mollusks. Class, that whole invertebrate bunch, predates the big Cambrian explosion by millions of years at very least. And we don't know how far back they went before they were generating shells, before these predator-prey relationships. Another mystery factor that we have no way of knowing is how much of the dynamics of these predator-prey relationships involve bacteria. Are involved by bacteria. If you have, for example, these strange palm frondy things in the Ediacara, that had endosymbiotic bacteria that made them really unpalatable, that it's very possible there are very small proto crawling around, trouble eating too much because they get sick. So it's all of those dynamics as to say why the things that eventually went exploding, an explosion, may have had ancestors there, but they weren't doing so much because everything was keeping them limited. Now, we don't have to guess that this kind of thing happens. Exactly what happened with the dinosaurs. That the mammals had actually developed before the dinosaurs lined up, but they become marginalized as the dinosaurs take over the ecosystem. Why? Because the climate's changing and their metabolism is actually more suitable to it than those little fur balls that have to maintain a heavy temperature. Hunker down and are little minor leaguers for the next 150 million years. They don't go extinct. They do their shtick. They occupy the night. They're nocturnal, blah, blah, blah. And then finally, when the dinosaurs check out in the big mass extinction, place to themselves and the mammals start proliferating, which takes time to happen all at once. Whatever survives the filter then starts evolving, and only over the course of many, many millions of years do you see diversification happening. And so that thing which I call an extinction pulse, it looks like the Ediacara biota that have a crash, and then there's a time when whatever was left over dominates the show, and then later on the circumstances change and you get a new surge, and that's what we're calling the Cambrian explosion. I'd love to say I came up with that analogy all on my own, but in fact, Douglas Irwin and others who are the paleontologists in this area had spotted it ahead of me, and so I can only say that I kind of thought about that on my own too, but nevertheless, because they're the regular paleontologists. Ooh, let me check our little questions here. 5 minutes to end of hour. Yes, when I actually do have to shut up, although if we're going to have an after show, I'm perfectly okay with that. Wonder how many were like the hammerhead worm. The neat thing about metazoans is that almost anything you can imagine look like it. And all you have to do is to look at some of those little minor phyla, like the little penis worms and all that, the arrow worms as they're actually called, and the chinorhynchs and stuff that if you see them in close-ups, you're going, whoa, that needs to have a science fiction movie. That one final solution or whatever the film the oh, it escapes my mind. I could look over here at the stupid video to see. I'm not finding it right off the bat. Yeah, I'll have to let it go. Anyway, it was a science fiction thing done from a video game thing, and one of them, that the only one that I'd seen, they used a lot of these weird as the monsters that were existing in this kind of trans-dimensional kind of thing, and a lot of them are going, wow, these are like ticks and chinorynchs and all that kind of stuff, and they were amazing, fabulous creatures. Maybe somebody will remember the show. That we tend to get what the Bible had is they were used to just the big animals that they knew. The universe would know all about Wolbachia, what's going on down in there, and all those chinorynchs and all those critters that existed on all the continents that didn't get mentioned. But if all they know is what they're making up, and all they know is what they're writing about from their local environment, they're not going to know this. So, well, scistrike will have to have an explosion event someday with his channel. With the numbers. Oh, I know. Oh, I must say, Paul, the video you did with me is the star of the show at the moment. I see there's over 3,000 people that have watched that little puppy. That means 3,000 people are going, isn't RJ fun? And that's as far as I'm going to go with it. 5,000, 10,000. Yeah, when you look at it, sometimes I'll look and see how many followers some of the people on Twitter have who I regard as complete nincompoops. And I go, whoa, that's a frightening number that they have that many people. The video stuff. But look how popular cat videos are, and look how many people follow President Trump. So no accounting for taste. At the very least, people who do follow me and kind of pay some attention with the content and find things kind of nice. Hey, we also remember, Cy, we got to put in our shameless plugs. We're almost running out of time here. I better put that in. Everybody can find almost all the shameless plug stuff at my main website. So it's as easy peasy. The only thing I haven't put up there yet is the Patreon, but that's associated with this, so we've got a different content there. May I remind people, Jeranism has more Patreons than I do. What kind of world is that? Now, yeah, I'd love to see some of these things. Intriguing to see. And the Fossil Genie shows up with stuff every once in a while. Never count that out. You'll find sometimes the most amazing little things that will pop up. One area that's from the paleogenomic side, and there's just some early work on that, is I've asked some anti-evolutionists this question and they've never answered. Did Eddie have homeobox genes? Now, from evolutionary perspective, it really looks like they probably did, because every metazoan uses homeobox genes as pattern formation. The question is, how can you produce these strange forms that are unlike anything of any living organism using homeobox genes? And we'll see which one makes it there, the creationists who are simply dogmatizing, or the people who are actually doing the science work and eventually theoretically retroengineering. I'm not going to place my bet on the creationists to get there ahead of us. NRA has more members than the National Academy of Sciences, also quite true. You betcha. Although the NRA, it's a tragic case with that, because they were Pelletier and the weird wingnuts took over, a genuinely nice group, advocated gun safety and gun education, and they were not opposed to reasonable things for safety and to keep stuff out of the hands of nutballs, and it has become so politicized and is now knee-jerk connected up with the same culture camp groups that support Donald Trump and are largely young Earth creationists, that you've got some agreements going on here that are very sinister and troubling. Okay, I think we're at the target time here, Cy. Are you there?
Yes, indeed. Howdy.
Hope I didn't bore anybody.
Never. No, didn't. Well, I could say not for me anyway. No boredom occurred over here.
Tried to answer it came up and riff off the material. And it's always a spur to thought. It always is a wonderful feedback thing.
All right.
Maintenance group. yeah, no, I'm still riffing off of the NRA things. Sorry.
Carry on. I gotta wrench Steve so we can put some links up.
Yeah, and that's why it's important to know the history of things, because the one thing ideologues have a tendency to do is to trim the history down to fit their little teeny ideology box. And it's like getting your history of the KKK from Dinesh D'Souza. Oh, you're getting a parsed version of it. And that kind of thing is always troublesome. The first duty of the historian is to let the chips fall where they may. You may not like the history, but first try to get it straight. Decisions based upon it. But ideologues, Tortukans, make terrible historians because they don't let the chips fall where they may. They find out what chips they can pick up to match the dogma they want to be true. And the moment you get into that, the worst tyrannies of history are all ones that mangle the history and rearrange stuff. From North Korea today, the Aztecs used to do it. They were the first to burn Maya books before the Spanish came along. They were kind of like the Nazis of their time. Games with that. Oh, John Oliver. Yeah, I wish I had cable again. I'd be able to see him, but unfortunately, I don't have the higher level stuff. Air Shutter. Thank you, Brad, for liking the show. Tell everybody about it, damn it. Struggling scholar. I'm trying to do work that's never been done before, not even the NCSE. Things on a scale that's never been done before. Slam Dunk is the first big result of that. Very proud of it and would like everybody in the world to own it. Give to your creationist friend, yeah. It'll give me royalties and give them fits.
All right. Well, we're at just about an hour. We will. It sounded like an after show was approved by all. Am I not correct there?
Oh well, I'm certainly always open for it. As you can tell, I'm shy and quiet, and it's hard to get me out of my shell.
I have noticed that, but if we prompt you a little bit, we can kind of get you to open up. All right. We'll
nudge me.
Oh, we should probably mention that it's not 100% sure, but next week we may be doing RJ Evolutions Hour actually on RJ's channel. Right? We were talking about that, so we're going to try
up to whether or not they can get the old. Is that the one that Steve put in above there? The GOMTU. I'll copy that over. I'm keeping a track because I don't want to actually jump over into these side issues while I'm trying to do online. Whoops, I don't want to save that. I just want to copy the damn link. Okay. And that way I can get at it to it later because I don't see anything on that in my bibliography, so I want to check up on that. I may have it in some other context. Copper Harbor. Find that out when you're literally doing hashtag tip work. That's how I roll. I find out information when a creationist brings up something stupid that whatever pops down the line, I then follow up on it if I don't have my bibliography. It means that strengthens my case. It means that I now learn things, and it means I'm now one step farther ahead of the opposition. Doing what poor Nathan couldn't quite pull off. Was it Nathan? I keep on forgetting it. It started with a name. This Hovind debate is that if you own it better than they do, you can get real fast, and you can get the thing where you start losing your temper instead of dropping rocks. And that's why it really is important. You need to subscribe. Yeah, well, all the video material is all bloody free. And I've got subscribers. I do occasional direct YouTube things. That was the real base, more complicated and is much more interactive. I love it. And if I can manage to lead me through step by step as the old dog, I'll get that new trick organized. And we can keep up on the thing. But I hope we can build a genuine network of people act as a genuine science reaction force on every theoretical woo topic that might come up. Because if you networks of people on Twitter and other areas, we probably have almost every expertise you could imagine. but we got to figure out how to marshal it efficiently. So the wooists in the world can't do their wooing nearly as much and nearly as readily as they do without somebody stomping on them.
All right, RJ, do your commercial. Put a link to the Patreon.
Yeah, let me that up. Let me open the file up and grab that. Didn't put up yet in my regular website, but I got the links to all the books, all the different formats of the books. So they file here, wall, this other stuff.
You might want to kill some browser windows. You're starting to robot a little over here, Chief.
There, I got it copied. There we go. It's that simple. I don't know why I'm taking this much trouble. Goddamn thing, but that's me.
I know why you're taking this much trouble. It's because we've gone over an hour.
Down somewhere,
you're trying to get overtime.
I don't care to remember it. We're at 6:07. We better call a halt and put up the pug or whatever my my little dancing show, and then we'll switch over to
Yep, we will close this, and we will be bringing up the after show, so you guys can continue to converse with RJ here momentarily. And just give us a little time to set up, and we'll be.
Thank you, Dave. I promise never to put a long list of the creationists' fact claimants ever again.
All right. Well, here let's show RJ's little commercial here. Here we go, everybody. Closing.